They say some moments haunt you forever. And I didn't believe it until now. It's been 2 years since everything changed, 2 years since I discovered the things my husband loves watching me do were not what I thought. Let me take you back to the beginning, to a time when I thought I had it all figured out. My husband and I, we weren't perfect, but who is, right? We had our routines, our inside jokes, our shared history. It wasn't always romantic or exciting, but it was comfortable. Or so I thought. You know that feeling when life starts to feel like a loop? You wake up, go to work, come home, eat dinner, go to bed, just to do it all over again. That's where we were. Somewhere along the way, the spark faded. But I told myself that's normal. That's marriage. That's what people don't talk about when they say, happily ever after. But deep down, I was lonely. I mean, really lonely. The kind of lonely where you sit in a room full of people and still feel invisible. My husband, he was there, physically. But emotionally, he felt like a stranger. I'd catch him staring at me sometimes, not with love or tenderness, but with this strange intensity, like he was watching a movie only he understood. I didn't know what to make of it, but I shrugged it off. I mean, he's my husband. He loves me, right? And then there were the comments. Little things he'd say that didn't seem strange at first, but they stuck with me. Like the time he said, "You're so much more alive when other people are around." Or when he'd laugh and tell me, "You're at your best when you're not even thinking about me." I didn't get it back then. I thought maybe he was just teasing, trying to encourage me to be more social. But looking back, I can see it so clearly now. Those weren't just comments. They were clues. The day it all started, it was so ordinary. That's the thing about life, it doesn't warn you when a storm is coming. It was a Saturday, sunny but not too hot. I remember because I was wearing this light sundress he always said he liked. We were hosting a small gathering at the house, a mix of friends, neighbors, and colleagues. You know, the usual. He was in charge of the grill, and I was playing hostess, moving from group to group, making sure everyone was fed and happy. At some point, I noticed him watching me. Not just glancing over to see what I was doing, but really watching me. His eyes followed me as I laughed with one of the neighbors, as I refilled someone's drink, as I adjusted the strap of my dress that had slipped off my shoulder. It wasn't the kind of look that makes you feel loved or wanted. It was something else. Something I couldn't put into words at the time, but felt in my bones. And then he said it. He pulled me aside, away from the crowd, and with this little smirk, he whispered, "I love watching you." I laughed it off because, honestly, what else was I supposed to do? But the way he said it, it wasn't playful. It wasn't romantic. It was almost calculated. Like he wasn't talking to me, but about me. The rest of the day went on as usual, or at least it seemed that way. But that comment? It stayed with me. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way his eyes would linger when I wasn't looking. The way he'd subtly encourage me to be more outgoing around other people, especially men. The way he seemed to light up, not when I was with him, but when I was with them. At first, I told myself I was overthinking. I mean, marriage is complicated, right? People have quirks, and maybe this was just his way of appreciating me. But as time went on, those little moments added up, and I started to see a pattern. It wasn't love. It wasn't admiration. It was something much darker. And the scariest part? I didn't know what to do about it. That's the thing about these moments, the ones that haunt you. They don't hit you all at once. They creep up on you slowly, until one day you wake up and realize your life isn't what you thought it was. That's what happened to me. And as I stand here, telling you this, I can still feel it, the confusion, the betrayal, the fear. But most of all, the loneliness. The kind of loneliness that makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself, about love, about trust. So here I am, sharing this with you, not because I have the answers, but because I don't. Because maybe, just maybe, you felt this way too. And if you have, well, maybe we're not as alone as we think we are. But before we jump in, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. This inspires and motivates us to bring you more stories like this, because you mean a lot to us and we truly appreciate you for doing so. You know, It's funny how you can live in the same house as someone and still feel like you're miles apart. Our home was nice, cozy even. Picture perfect from the outside. A tidy lawn, the kind of porch where neighbors would wave as they passed. Inside, though, it was different. I'd sit at the dining table every evening, my plate barely touched, while he sat on the couch, his eyes glued to the TV. It wasn't like we were fighting. There was no yelling, no door slamming. Just this silence. A thick, heavy silence that wrapped around me like a blanket I couldn't shake off. I'd try to start conversations, sometimes little things, like, "How was your day?" or "Did you see that email from the school?" But his responses were always short, distracted. A grunt, a nod, and then his eyes would drift back to the screen. So I stopped trying. What was the point? When someone barely notices you, it's hard to keep putting yourself out there. And yet, I'd catch myself staring at him, hoping, wishing, he'd look at me the way he used to. But he never did. Not anymore. Sometimes, you don't realize how much you miss being seen until someone truly looks at you. It wasn't always like this. We used to talk about everything, our dreams, our fears, stupid little things that didn't matter but made us laugh until our sides hurt. He used to look at me like I was the only person in the room. I can still remember the way he'd tuck my hair behind my ear or the way his hand would find mine, just because. But somewhere along the way, those moments became fewer and farther between. Life happened. Work got stressful. Bills piled up. The kids needed this and the house needed that. And somewhere in the middle of it all, we forgot how to be us. I told myself it was normal. That every couple goes through this. That it would pass. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just the stress or the busyness. Something was missing, something I couldn't quite put my finger on but felt like a hole inside me. And every time I looked at him, laughing at some dumb joke on TV, that hole felt a little bigger. I wish I could tell you I fought harder to fix things. That I sat him down and told him how I felt. But I didn't. Part of me was scared he wouldn't care. The other part was scared he would care, and I'd have to face the fact that our love wasn't enough anymore. So I did what so many people do when they're hurting. I pretended everything was fine. I smiled when I needed to, laughed at the right moments, and kept my pain tucked away where no one could see it. Not even him. But pretending can only get you so far. Because eventually, someone will notice. Someone will look at you in a way that reminds you what it feels like to be seen. And when that happens, well, that's when everything changes. It all started with a single sentence. Just one. It was a Saturday morning, one of those days that feel full of possibility. The sunlight was streaming through the kitchen window as I bustled around, preparing for the weekend gathering we had planned. I was chopping vegetables, humming to myself, when my husband walked in. He leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee, and for a moment, it felt almost normal. Like the old days. Then, out of nowhere, he said it, "I love watching you at these things. Especially when you're talking to people, especially the guys. It shows your vibrant side." At first, I thought I misheard him. I stopped chopping, turned to look at him, and there he was, calm as ever, like he hadn't just said something so strange. I laughed nervously, unsure how to respond. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to sound casual. But the way he looked at me, there was something in his eyes, something I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't love. It wasn't tenderness. It was excitement. "I don't know," he said, shrugging like it was no big deal. "You just seem more alive when you're with other people. It's nice to see." And with that, he walked away, leaving me standing there, knife in hand, wondering what the hell had just happened. I don't know what I expected that day, but it wasn't this. I moved through the crowd, smiling, laughing, doing what I always do at these things, making sure everyone was comfortable, everyone had what they needed. But this time, it felt different. I caught myself glancing at him every now and then, wondering if he was still watching me. And every time I looked, there he was. Just watching. Not in a possessive way, but in a way that made me feel exposed. At one point, I found myself talking to one of the neighbors, Mark, I think his name was. He's one of those people who's easy to talk to, you know? Funny, charming, the kind of guy who makes you feel interesting just by the way he listens. I don't even remember what we were talking about, but I remember laughing, really laughing, for the first time in what felt like forever. And when I glanced toward my husband, there it was again. That look. That strange, almost thrilled look. It should have made me uncomfortable. Maybe it did. But more than that, it made me feel seen. Not by him, exactly, but by someone. And for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. I felt vibrant. I told myself it was nothing. Just a friendly conversation, harmless and ordinary. But the way my husband looked at me that day, it wasn't ordinary. It wasn't the look of a man who was jealous or upset. It was the look of someone who was enjoying it. And that realization? It was like a switch flipped inside me. For years, I'd felt invisible, like I was fading into the background of my own life. And suddenly, here I was, standing in the spotlight, not because I'd asked for it, but because he'd put me there. And the worst part? I didn't hate it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the day in my head, the conversations, the laughter, the way Mark looked at me, the way my husband looked at me. I didn't know what it meant, not yet. But I knew it was the beginning of something. Something I couldn't stop, even if I wanted to. They say every story has a turning point. A moment when everything changes. For me, it was that day, that gathering, that one sentence. I love watching you. I just didn't realize how much those words would come to haunt me. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind refused to settle. My husband's words from earlier kept looping in my head. I love watching you. The way he said it, so calm, so matter-of-fact, like it was the most natural thing in the world. But it wasn't natural, not to me. It felt wrong. And yet, a part of me was drawn to it. Was that what scared me the most? I turned to look at him, lying beside me, his breathing slow and steady. He looked so peaceful, like someone without a care in the world. How could he be so relaxed when my chest felt like it was full of static? I wanted to shake him awake, ask him what he meant, why he felt the need to watch me instead of being with me. But I didn't. I stayed silent, like I always did, because deep down, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Was it love? Or something darker? I started to notice things I hadn't before. The way he seemed more engaged when I talked about other people, what Mark had said, how the neighbors were doing, how the kids' teacher had complimented me on my volunteer work. The way his eyes would light up, not when I spoke to him, but when I mentioned someone else. At first, I thought maybe it was harmless. Maybe he just liked hearing about my day. Maybe he was finally noticing me in his own strange way. But then there were the moments when we were alone. The silences felt heavier, like there was something unsaid hanging between us. He didn't ask how I was feeling or what I was thinking. He just watched. Always watching. And the worst part? I started to live for it. I started to crave that look, the look that made me feel alive, even if I didn't fully understand it. I started to live for those moments when he seemed proud of me. But deep down, I knew there was something off. But then the guilt would creep in. What kind of wife was I to think like that? To want something more when I already had a husband who, in his own way, seemed to care? I told myself I was being ridiculous. He wasn't doing anything wrong. If anything, I should be grateful. He was noticing me, wasn't he? Even if it wasn't the way I wanted, at least it was something. But the more I tried to push those thoughts away, the louder they got. Why wasn't he engaging with me directly? Why did he prefer to watch me from afar instead of being a part of my life? Was this how love was supposed to feel? Detached? Observational? I told myself it didn't matter. I had a family to take care of, responsibilities to juggle. I didn't have time to dissect every look, every word, every feeling. But at night, when the house was quiet and the world was still, those questions wouldn't let me go. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I started to wonder if I was the one who was broken, or if we both were. I didn't know who I was becoming. I wasn't the type to seek attention or validation. At least, I didn't think I was. But now? Now, I found myself craving it. Not just from Mark, but from anyone who made me feel seen. I started to feel like two different people, the wife who smiled and played along, and the woman who wanted more. And the scariest part? I didn't know which one was real. I kept telling myself it was harmless, that nothing had happened, that nothing would happen. But deep down, I knew better. I could feel it, this invisible line I was inching closer to with every passing day. And once I crossed it, there'd be no going back. It didn't happen all at once. It was subtle, so subtle I almost didn't notice it at first. But once I did, it was impossible to ignore. My husband had a way of steering conversations, planting little seeds in my mind without outright saying anything. It started with compliments, small, offhand remarks that felt strange coming from him. "You looked good tonight," he'd say after we got back from a dinner party, his tone almost casual. Or, "That dress really turns heads. You should wear it more often." At first, I thought he was just being nice, trying to make me feel good about myself. But then, one evening, he said something that stuck with me in a way I couldn't shake. "I think people notice you more than you realize. It's one of the things I love about you." The way he said it, it wasn't jealousy or admiration. It was pride. Like I was something to be displayed, a piece of art he enjoyed sharing with the world. And instead of making me feel cherished, it made me feel exposed. At first, I told myself it was harmless. He was noticing me, wasn't he? Isn't that what I'd wanted all along? But the more it happened, the more it started to feel deliberate. Like he wasn't just observing, he was orchestrating. I started to feel like I was part of some unspoken game, a game I didn't fully understand. And then there was Mark. It wasn't like I sought him out. He just had a way of being there. At first, it was small things, a casual conversation, a shared laugh. But over time, those moments started to feel charged, like there was something simmering beneath the surface. Something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I wasn't thinking about anyone else in that moment. Not Mark, not my husband, not the people watching. For the first time in so long, I felt alive. The music seemed to wrap around me, pulling me out of my head and into my body. I could feel their eyes on me, but instead of shrinking away, I leaned into it. I let myself be seen. And then I caught his eye, my husband, standing in the corner, his drink in hand. He wasn't smiling exactly, but there was something in his expression that stopped me cold. He looked satisfied. Like this was exactly what he wanted. Like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That night, I lay awake again, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to answer. Was this his way of showing love? Or was it something else entirely? Did he enjoy the attention I got because it made him proud, or because it made him feel powerful? I didn't know what to think anymore. All I knew was that I was walking a line, and every step I took brought me closer to the edge. And the scariest part? I wasn't sure I wanted to stop. What happens when the person you trust the most becomes the one who pushes you toward the unthinkable? It all came to a head on a night that seemed no different from the others. A quiet evening at home, just the two of us. The kids were at my mother's for the weekend, the house was still, and I was folding laundry in the living room. He was in his office, as usual, the faint hum of his computer drifting down the hall. I don't know what made me go in there. Maybe it was the silence, the strange pull of curiosity, or maybe it was something deeper, something I didn't want to acknowledge. But when I walked into his office, I saw it. His laptop was open, the screen glowing faintly in the dim light. And there, on the screen, was me. Not just me. A video of me, laughing, dancing, talking to Mark. It was from the gathering we'd hosted a few weeks earlier, the one where I'd let myself feel alive for the first time in ages. The footage was clear, too clear, as though he'd recorded it intentionally. My breath caught in my throat, my pulse hammering in my ears. I clicked on another file. And another. Each one was the same. Me, captured in moments I thought were private, moments I thought were mine. The way I moved, the way I smiled, the way others responded to me, it was all there, neatly catalogued. And with every clip, the weight of his betrayal pressed down on me like a stone. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked calm. Like he'd been waiting for this moment. "You shouldn't have gone through my things," he said, his tone maddeningly even. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart pounding in my chest. "Don't turn this on me." "What the hell is this?" Why are you recording me? He sighed, running a hand through his hair, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. Then, finally, he looked at me, his eyes steady, his voice soft. Because I love seeing you like that, he said. I love seeing you light up. It makes me feel alive. At first, I didn't understand. How could he say that? How could he think that recording me, stealing those moments, was love? Alive? I spat, my voice trembling with fury. What about me? Do you even see me? Or do you only see what I am when I'm around other people? His expression didn't change. If anything, he looked resigned. It's not like that, he said quietly. You don't understand. When I see you like that, when I see how others respond to you, it reminds me of why I fell in love with you in the first place. It's like I get to have a piece of you I can't reach anymore. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at him, my vision blurred with tears, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. A piece of me? I repeated, my voice breaking. You don't love me. You love the version of me you think other people see. You love the performance. But the real me? The one standing right in front of you? You don't even know her. He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned away, my chest heaving, the tears spilling over. I didn't want to hear his excuses. I didn't want to hear anything. I couldn't stop watching. It was like looking at a stranger, someone I barely recognized. The woman on the screen was vibrant, alive, everything I used to be. And as I sat there, tears streaming down my face, I realized the truth. He didn't love me. He loved the idea of me. He loved the fantasy. And in that moment, I wasn't sure which hurt more, the betrayal of the recordings or the betrayal of knowing I'd been invisible to him for so long. He sat across from me, silent, watching me watch myself. And for the first time, I truly saw him, not as my husband, but as a man who had been using me to fill some void in himself. I wanted to scream, to cry, to tear everything apart. But all I could do was sit there, staring at the screen, as the weight of it all came crashing down. They say betrayal comes in many forms. Sometimes it's an affair. Sometimes it's a lie. But this was something deeper. It wasn't just about the recordings. It was about everything they represented. The distance, the disconnect, the way he'd turned me into a reflection of his own desires, instead of seeing me for who I was. And as I sat there, staring at the man I thought I knew, I realized I wasn't mourning the loss of our marriage. I was mourning the loss of myself. The days that followed felt like living in a house with no walls. Everything was exposed, every word, every silence, every glance. I couldn't look at him the same way anymore. How could I? Every time I saw his face, I saw the laptop, the files, the twisted version of love he claimed to feel for me. And yet, he acted like nothing had changed. Like we could just move on. It wasn't a big deal, he told me one morning, as casually as if we were talking about the weather. I only did it because I love you. You're beautiful when you're happy. I just wanted to hold on to that. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. What was there to say? I wanted to scream that it wasn't love, that love didn't feel like this. Love didn't turn you into something to be watched, studied, catalogued. But instead, I just nodded, my throat tight, my stomach churning. And in that moment, something inside me broke. I thought I could move past it. I told myself it wasn't worth destroying our family over. But the damage was done. Something inside me had already shifted, and no matter how much I tried to deny it, I could feel it growing, this quiet, gnawing resentment, this ache for something more. I didn't trust him anymore. And worse, I didn't trust myself. I started questioning everything, every smile, every touch, every memory. Was it real? Had any of it been real? Or had I always been just a reflection of what he wanted me to be? He thought he could talk me out of it, that he could smooth it over with words. But every time he tried, it only made things worse. Because the more he explained, the more I realized he didn't understand. He didn't see how deeply he'd cut me, how he'd taken something fragile and sacred and turned it into something ugly. And so I did what I always did. I smiled when I had to. I played the role of the good wife, the good mother. But inside, I was crumbling. And as the days turned into weeks, I found myself looking elsewhere for something to fill the void. It wasn't intentional. I didn't wake up one day and decide to look for validation in someone else. It just happened. At first, it was harmless. A kind word here, a small gesture there. But the more I felt seen by others, the more I realized how invisible I'd been in my own life. Mark didn't know the details of what I was going through, but he saw me. The real me. Or at least, that's what I told myself. And for a little while, that was enough to make me forget the weight I carried at home. I knew it was dangerous. I knew I was walking a fine line. But I couldn't stop. Because for the first time in years, I felt like I mattered. Like I was more than just a wife, a mother, a reflection of someone else's needs. I felt alive. But in the back of my mind, I knew it wouldn't last. I knew I was heading towards something I couldn't undo. And as much as I tried to convince myself otherwise, I could feel the ground shifting beneath me, the cracks spreading, the inevitable collapse waiting just ahead. There are moments in life where everything slows down. The world around you fades, and all you're left with are your thoughts, raw and unfiltered. That's where I found myself one quiet evening, sitting alone in the darkened living room, the soft glow of my phone illuminating my face. Mark's message was still there, sitting at the top of my screen. I'd read it a dozen times already, the words etched into my mind. Thinking of you. Hope you're okay. It was simple, unassuming. But the way it made me feel? That was anything but simple. I wanted to tell myself it didn't mean anything, that it was just a kind gesture from a friend. But deep down, I knew better. I wasn't saving the message because it was polite. I was saving it because it made me feel seen, cared for, in a way I hadn't felt in years. And that terrified me. I stared at that message for what felt like hours, my mind spinning with questions I didn't want to answer. Was this wrong? Was I wrong? Or was this just what happens when someone gives you what you've been craving for so long? And then there was him, my husband. Could I forgive him? Did I even want to? Or had I already strayed too far emotionally to care? The truth was, I didn't know anymore. I didn't know if what we had was worth saving or if it was already too late. I thought about the recordings, about the way he'd tried to justify them as love. Was it love? Or was it control? And if it was control, had I been complicit in it all along? Had I let myself become a version of me that only existed to make him feel alive? The more I thought about it, the more tangled it became. If he truly loved me, why didn't it feel like love? Why did it feel like I was something to be observed, admired from a distance, but never really known? And then there was Mark. I didn't love him, not in the way you're supposed to love someone. But I couldn't deny how he made me feel. The way he looked at me, like I was someone worth listening to, someone worth noticing. It was intoxicating, that feeling. And dangerous. Was I betraying my husband by letting myself feel that way? Or had he betrayed me first by turning our love into something I didn't recognize anymore? I knew I couldn't avoid him forever. Sooner or later, we'd have to talk about what happened, about everything. But the thought of it felt like staring into a void, uncertain of what I'd find on the other side. I wanted to believe we could fix this, that we could find our way back to what we used to be. But how do you fix something when you don't even know where the cracks began? And how do you forgive someone when you're not sure you even want to try? For so long, I'd been running on autopilot, playing the roles everyone expected of me. Wife, mother, hostess. But somewhere along the way, I'd lost myself. And now, standing there, staring at my own reflection, I realized I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep hiding behind smiles and small talk and the hope that things would magically get better. Something had to change. I didn't know what that meant yet or how it would happen. But I knew one thing for certain, I couldn't keep living like this. Not for him. Not for anyone. Not even for myself. I know I'm not the only one who's been here stuck in a place where love feels like a question mark instead of an answer. I know there are others out there who've felt invisible, who've wondered if they're more than just a reflection of someone else's needs. Maybe you've been there too. If you have, how did you handle it? Did you find a way to fight for what you had? Or did you have to let it go to find yourself again? Please, share your story in the comments. Because I know that someone else out there needs to hear it. Maybe they're sitting in their own dark living room right now, scrolling through their phone, searching for something to make them feel less alone. Asterisk, and if you've never been in this place, maybe my story can be a warning or a reminder. Don't let the people you love fade into the background. Don't let yourself disappear either. Life is too short to be anything but seen. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories like this one. Your support means the world to me, and it helps others find the space where they can share, heal, and feel a little less alone. Loneliness is a strange thing. It can creep up on you slowly, like a shadow stretching at sunset, until you're completely surrounded by it. It can make you question everything: your love, your loyalty, even your own worth. And if you're not careful, it can push you to places you never thought you'd go. I know that now. I know that the answers I was searching for in Mark, in my husband, in everyone else, weren't out there. They were in here, inside me, buried under years of trying to be everything for everyone else. And once I stopped looking outward and started looking inward, I began to see the truth. I can't tell you that I've figured it all out, because I haven't. But what I do know is this: no one else can define your worth but you. Not your partner, not your friends, not the world around you. And if you ever feel like you've lost yourself, don't wait for someone else to find you. Stand up, look in the mirror, and remember who you are. Maybe this is the hardest lesson of all. Love isn't always enough. Not when it comes at the cost of your own soul. But healing? Healing starts when you stop searching for someone else to fill the empty spaces and start filling them yourself. Thank you for watching. Your story matters. Please share it below.